meet on Zoom at least, if not in person,
You're right.
As long as
Right?
he is his IT person with him.
because I still
right.
want to interview you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club. This is BBC Live, and I'm Todd DiPastino, the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We come to you every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern and every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern to share stories of veterans about their experiences in the service. And tonight we're talking about one of the greatest events an event that I think I enjoy talking about more than any other. And I'm not a veteran, I'm a historian. And that is the Berlin Airlift. And with us, we have experts on the Berlin Airlift and participants, those who were there. We have Ralph Dion, who's a Air Force veteran, 98 and a half years old, who was in the Air Force SC 54 maintenance person. And there in Germany during the Berlin Airlift. He's joining us from Nashua, New Hampshire. How are you doing, Ralph?
I'm doing fine tonight, and I'm enjoying the show here.
Very good. And we have Bibi LeBlanc, who is a native of West Berlin and who now lives in the United States and has worked very hard on a wonderful oral history project that has spawned a book or two about the history of the Berlin Airlift. Thank you, Bibi, for bringing this program together.
Thank you, Todd, for hosting us.
We have Bibi's mother, who we're going to call Omi tonight. This is Omi Roth. She is joining us microphoneless, so she will just wave and say hello. Hello, Omi. She grew up in East Berlin, and if we get her microphone working, we're going to have her share some stories about that. And we have Daggy Weiss Snodgrass joining us from Springfield, Missouri. Hello, Daggy. Thank you for joining us tonight. Daggy was one of the young children who picked up some of the candy bomber parachutes. That's right. Yeah. That was thrown out of an airplane by the great Gail Halvorson. If you don't know Gail Halvorson, he passed away 4 years ago. And it's no exaggeration for me to say that having Gail Halvorson join us on this program about a year before he died was really one of the highlights of my life. He's somebody that I had admired from afar for a very long time. I had taught about him, and he was able to join us and share his story. And we have his daughter, Denise Halvorson Williams, joining us. Thank you, Denise, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You know, I thought before we would dive into the Berlin Airlift story, I would remind everybody that we're here again every Monday night at 7 and every Thursday night at 7. We're a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh. We do veteran storytelling programs in person, about 40 of them a year. And then we do twice a week virtually. On Thursday night, we'll be talking about Operation Earnest Will. We usually focus on World War II on Thursday nights. But tonight we have a special guest, and we thought we would fit this into our calendar because it is so timely. Operation Earnest Will was an operation that occurred in the Persian Gulf in 1987 and 1988. And this will ring some bells with you. The issue was Iraq and Afghanistan, or Iraq and Iran were at war, and they were blockading the Persian Gulf and not allowing oil tankers to leave. The United States stepped in with the Navy, and for almost a year, maybe 18 months, escorted oil tankers through the Persian Gulf so that the oil flow could continue through the world. And this was really the first armed conflict that the U.S. had with Iran. It was very much a preview of what is going on at the very moment. And we're going to have author Tom Duffy, who was a naval officer who participated in Operation Earnest Will, join us and has written a book about it. And we will also have Tom Hastings, who's a Marine who participated in Operation Praying Mantis, which was a part of Earnest Will. So this is the tanker war. It's remembered as the tanker war in the Gulf. Sean, thank you very much for bringing this program together and for hosting it Thursday night. I'll be on as a sidekick, but Sean will be running the program. Thank you, Sean.
Looking forward to it. Two great guests and a lot of history, and it leads all the way up to today. So we have a lot to cover on Thursday night. Hope you join us.
Yeah, a lot of contemporary relevance. I mean, this is something, a war that is largely forgotten and turns out is very important to understanding what's going on today. This is our magazine. We publish a quarterly magazine. As you know, this is our spring issue where we focused on America 250, sharing the stories a little unusual for us, sharing the stories of veterans who are long gone, those veterans of the American Revolution. And we published it because we thought that there was such a powerful resonance between the veteran stories from 250 years ago and the veteran stories we hear on this live stream today. The platform has changed, the mode of communication has changed, war has changed, weapons have changed, but the experience of military service and of war doesn't change that much, even with a long passage of time. So we send this out to 12,000 households and print out another 8,000, and we are just getting our summer magazine together. We're going to be sending it to the printer on Friday, and this is the cover. While our spring magazine kind of focused on the 250th anniversary of the United States, our summer magazine is going to focus on the 25th anniversary of 9/11, which is coming up on September 11th. So we're really going to have those who were in the military for 9/11 and who served afterwards share their stories and their memories of that time. So be on the lookout for this magazine. We send it for free, again, to 12,000 households. If you don't get it in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. Let us know your address and we'll make sure that we send it in the mail to you. And all this we do free of charge. And we do encourage people to become members of the Veterans Breakfast Club to support our mission. It's $50 a year. You get the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting a wonderful mission and a wonderful organization doing wonderful work throughout the country. $50 a year. You can go to veteransbreakfastclub.org/membership and sign up. Okay, here's how I thought we would do things, because the Berlin Airlift is something that is close to my heart and close to my teaching experience. I thought I would give everyone a thumbnail sketch, an overview of what the Berlin Airlift was, because there were many components of it. It lasted for almost a year, and I think it would just kind of refresh everybody's memories and get us all on the same page. The Berlin Airlift was this remarkable effort that the United States, Great Britain, and other allies made to keep a city of 2 million people alive, because it was blockaded during the Cold War, early days of the Cold War. And I'm going to share my screen here and remind you of what Germany looked like after World War II. This was an agreement hashed out in the Potsdam meetings right after World War II in July 1945 between Winston Churchill on the one hand and Clement Attlee, his successor as Prime Minister of Great Britain, and Harry Truman and Joseph Stalin. They decided how they were going to divide up Germany. And the idea was that they would divide Germany up into the several regroupment zones. You could see that the eastern part of Germany was given to Poland, and then this red part would be occupied by the Soviet Red Army. And then the green, gold, blue, and this kind of cream color would be occupied by the Western Allies, largely France and Great Britain and the United States, with a little bit of Luxembourg. And so the idea was that these would be regroupment zones. These would be kind of administrative units. These would not be hard borders. These would not be permanent frontiers. This would be kind of temporary zones of occupation until Germany would be reunified under one central government. This was something that Stalin agreed to, and it's pretty clear now, especially with the benefit of hindsight, that he fully expected the Allies to leave after a year or two at most, and the Soviets would eventually take over all of Germany. You could also see that he agreed to the subdivision of Berlin itself, the city, the capital of Germany, entirely within the Soviet zone, 110 miles from the western border of the Soviet zone. The city of Berlin was itself divided into 4 zones. The eastern part of the city was in Soviet occupation, and the western part of the city was shared occupation zones by the Western Allies, the United States, Great Britain, and France. Again, there's been a lot of speculation about why Stalin even agreed to allow Berlin to be divided, and it's pretty clear that he allowed it because he did not expect it to last. He expected that he would be able to take over Berlin very quickly because the United States had very little patience with occupations and didn't have the motivation to hold a city of West Berlin, which in truth had no strategic value to the United States. He thought he would be able to just take it right over. Again, this was an agreement that was made at the Potsdam meetings. Here's Attlee, Truman, and Stalin at Potsdam in the suburbs of Berlin. They hammered out this agreement, and you could see just how imbalanced the balance of power was in Germany. You could see that the Soviets had 1.5 million troops occupying East Germany with another 2 million in reserve. The United States had 100,000 soldiers in West Germany, and that number was shrinking rapidly as Americans were demanding that their young men come home after World War II and not take part in the occupation of Germany. On June 24th, 1948, Joseph Stalin declared a Berlin blockade. He did it in protest of a currency issue that the United States had done to try and stabilize and improve the German economy. And in retaliation, Stalin blockaded the city of West Berlin, a city of 2 million people. He didn't allow any cargo, anything to go in or out by road, by rail, or by barge. What he didn't consider was that there was an agreement that the air corridors across Eastern Germany into West Berlin would remain open. And so the speculation was that Stalin, simply by closing off the land routes, would be able to coerce the city of West Berlin to join the Soviet side. That was the idea. Essentially, he was going to starve West Berlin into submission, offer the West Berliners rations, Soviet rations, in exchange for coming to the Soviet side. Daggy will tell us, and maybe Omi will tell us, just how devastated Berlin was after World War II. This was a city in 1948 with still no real functioning infrastructure and hardly a functioning government at all. There was no food, there's little sanitation, little running water. Most of the city was still in rubble. People were living out of their basements. There was mass illness and death. This was a apocalyptic landscape that only a madman would dream of. And it went on for years. And this is the environment where Omi and Daggy grew up in. It's hard to imagine. I think it's hard, especially for Americans, to imagine just how awful the situation in Berlin was. So Harry Truman had a choice to make. You have people dying in Berlin already, and now they're being cut off from all sources of food, fuel, and medicine. What does he do? He gathered his advisors, and his advisors gave him options, and none of them were good. You could declare war against the Soviet Union. That's probably not a good idea, considering that we're outnumbered 15-1. You could try and negotiate a settlement with Stalin. However, what cards do you hold? Very little. Or, this is what really the advisors advised, just abandon Berlin. I mean, West Berlin is not significant strategically. There's no real value in it. Cede this conflict with the Soviets and we'll get them down the road somewhere else. That was the idea. Truman, for some reason, refused to do that. He wrote in his diary, "We'll stay in Berlin, come what may." He made a decision that he would figure out a way to fight the Soviets in Berlin. And the person who really encouraged him, and he was really the only American encouraging Truman to take a stand in West Berlin, was this guy, Lucius Clay, who was the military governor of West occupied Germany. And he wrote this memo to the president saying, there's no practical reason why we should keep West Berlin. It's not going to help us in any strategic way, except on the issue of prestige. That Europe, all of Europe, is watching us. They're watching to see what we're going to do. How far will the U.S. extend itself for the freedom of Europe? How far will the United States risk to keep Western Europe free from Soviet occupation? He said, the prestige of the United States as a great power is on the line in West Berlin. And whether good or bad, that's the case. And so he made it, General Clay made it a point to tell the president, we should take a stand in West Berlin. And he gave very bad advice at how we should do it. He thought we should, run the blockade, break through the blockade with a truck convoy. But it was the British who came up with this crazy idea of an airlift that, the air corridors are open. And theoretically, we could fly enough airplanes to land 4,000 or 5,000 tons a day of food and fuel into West Berlin, and we could keep the city alive. I mean, dietitians were called in, sociologists were called in. How many calories do you need to keep a population of 2 million people alive, on 2,000 calories a day? And the calculators were taken out, the calculations were done, and it turns out you need about 646 tons of flour a day to keep a city alive. You need 109 tons of meat and fish. You need 125 tons of cereal. And it went all the way down. You need, thousands of tons of coal and gasoline to keep the houses warm and to keep the city alive. And this was a lot of, 4,500 tons a day. How are we going to get it there? We didn't have the planes. The United States had more planes, of course, during World War II than we have today. And yet those planes most of them were in boneyards, and the others were distributed around the world. You can see how rapidly our Air Force just wound down after VJ Day in 1945. The United States is left with about 20,000 airplanes and very few cargo planes in Europe. There were precisely 102 C-47s in Europe when the Berlin blockade began in May 1948. 102. Each one of those C-47s could carry 3.5 tons. So you could fly these 102 planes round the clock nonstop and still not deliver the tonnage that you need to keep West Berlin alive. And yet, Harry Truman made the decision to make it a go anyhow. And on June 25th, 1948, the airlift began. 32 C-47s flew in 80 tons of milk, flour, and medicine, just a tiny fraction of what was needed to keep the city alive. And yet it was a start. The idea was we had these 3 air corridors that would take off from British and American air bases. The American air base was in the south. The British air base was in the north. These corridors would fly in, and then a third corridor in the middle would be the exit. And you can see this is a short hop. This is 100 miles, 150 miles from the western zones into West Berlin and then back. That's how it began. To have the airlift reach its capacity, we're going to need a bigger cargo plane. And that bigger cargo plane was the C-54 Skymaster, but there were very few of them in the world, and most of them were in Asia. I think it was one of the commanders, I can't remember which commander, it could have been Lucius Clay himself, requested from the Air Force, hey, can we borrow some of your C-54s for the airlift? And the Air Force said, no, you may not. So Truman had to override that decision. And that really put Truman on the spot. I mean, he owned the airlift because the Republican Party was very much against this and very publicly against it. And they, for very good reason, they argued, A, it's going to be super expensive, which it was. B, it's not going to work, which expert opinion said it wouldn't. So, but he didn't listen. And instead he said, we're going to make it a go anyhow. And so from this moment on, Truman now owns the airlift. It's associated with him and his will. He called in this Major General William Tunner. I like to say that he's not a household name at all when it comes to World War II or American military history. And he should be, because he was the man who was in charge of the only airlift that had ever taken place during a war. And that was over the Himalayas, supplying the Chinese nationalist forces in World War II, flying over the hump. He oversaw that airlift. So he had done it in India, the China-Burma-India theater. He was now brought into Europe to oversee this airlift. And he came up with these crazy rules for how this thing could become more efficient. These planes would eventually take off every 3 minutes, round the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They would land, unload, and return without the crews leaving the airplanes. That was the idea. These planes would land every minute at Tempelhof Airport and another airport in West Berlin. The crews would unload, and the crews would maintain the aircraft, and that's how the airlift reached its full capacity by late summer 1948. The Soviet response was first disbelief. They couldn't believe that the Allies were actually attempting this. And then the Soviets did everything they could, short of actually shooting down planes, to disrupt the airlift. They
Weird.
fired artillery in front of the airplanes. They shined searchlights in the eyes of the pilots. They dropped paratroopers right in front of the airplanes. They did everything they could. They had their yak fighters kind of weave in and out of the formations, and just to disrupt it as much as they could, and it did work. This is a kind of a side note to the airlift was the remarkable Gail Halvorson, Denise's father, who was a pilot very early on. I think he arrived in July 1948. In fact, he arrived so early that when it had not been organized yet, the airlift hadn't been systematized quite yet. He landed. He was able to get out of his airplane. He got out of his airplane at Tempelhof. He saw some hungry kids, raggedy-looking kids on the other side of a fence. They thanked him for the airlift. They thanked him for trying to save the city. He reached in his pocket, pulled out a stick of gum, and this great group of kids sliced up the stick of gum into 30 pieces. The oldest kid distributed them all, and then they passed the wrapper around to sniff. It was just one of the most moving stories you've ever heard. Gail took it upon himself to begin dropping candy, chocolate, other sweets that were gathered from rations with little homemade parachutes out the window of his C-47 or C-54, and kind of one-man operation to kind of, bring a little happiness to the children of West Berlin. There's a great story that we'll share about how he gets called in. He thought he was going to be court-martialed for this, and William Tunner called him a genius and ordered that all other pilots do it as well. So this became a great kind of diplomatic effort to promote the airlift and to promote the humanitarian aspect of the airlift. It was a brutal, hard mission. The pilots hated it. The crews tended to hate it. This is round the clock flying in dangerous weather, under dangerous conditions, with kind of aircraft that was really getting beaten up. People died, so 70 crew members died, 31 of them Americans, planes crashed. It was ugly, especially during the hard winter of 1948 and 49. But after Easter, by May 1949, Joseph Stalin had finally given up. He realized that the crazy Allies were not going to stop the airlift, that they were going to go all out to keep the city of West Berlin. And he kind of, surrendered. And it was an unambiguous victory, unambiguous Western victory in the Cold War. And the Cold War would turn really bad and violent after this. Look at the date, May 12th, 1948. Think of the things that come after this date, May 12th, 1949. You have the Soviets test an atomic weapon by August. By October, there's the Chinese Communist Revolution. And by the next year, you have the Korean War. Then you have the two, East Germany and West Germany split. They become their own permanent nations. You have NATO on the one side, the Warsaw Pact on the other. This is kind of really the beginning of the worst years of the Cold War. So that's the story of the airlift very briefly. And I thought we could now get into our storytelling. And I thought I would get in with Bibi. Bibi LeBlanc, you have this wonderful oral history project. You grew up in West Berlin. How much did you know about the airlift when you were a child growing up there?
I knew nothing. I knew nothing about it.
Why not?
That's a great question. I feel like every child, every person in Germany should know this story, and especially in Berlin. I grew up in West Berlin. I was born in 1963, so 15 years after the airlift ended, and never learned about it in school. I knew the monument, of course, and when I'd ask, my mom would say, well, there were airplanes flying in food, groceries, and they landed every 3 minutes. That's all I knew when a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, that story actually kind of found me. I ran into Tim Chope of the Berlin Airlift Historical Foundation and his airplane, The Spirit of Freedom, which, as you probably know, is decorated like an exhibit on the inside, like a museum plane, telling
Yes.
the story of the airlift, right? And so I ran into him, and I was already making books at the time, and he said, make one about the airlift. And I'm like, yeah, maybe someday.
Maybe.
But I didn't know anything about it. And then shortly after that, I was in Berlin at Tempelhof, and I did a tour there, and I saw a poster that the 75th anniversary was coming up. And I'm like, well, if I'm gonna do a book about the airlift, I should do it right now, so in time for the 75th anniversary. And so then I went home, ordered all the books I could find on the topic, and took a deep dive, and was blown away by that unique and so remarkable chapter of our history, of my history, that I never knew anything about, you know? And so I published that book, Wings of Freedom, and met Denise and met Ralph in Berlin and got to know them. And Denise was kind enough to write a foreword for the book. And so we've become friends since then. And when I went to the 75th anniversary celebrations in Germany, there were different ones. There was the ones in Berlin, of course, you know, on May 12th when the blockade ended. And then there was one in Fassberg, which was one of the air bases, one in Wiesbaden, which was another one. And I met people who were children during the airlift, or there were a few veterans that were there, like Ralph, you know, and they were telling me their stories. And I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody should write these stories down. They're all gonna be lost, you know, if we don't. There isn't that much time left. And then Denise is like, I think it was Denise, she's like, well, why don't you do it? You already do books, you know? And and so I pondered that for a while because I knew it would be a big project, but in the end decided to do it because it was just, these stories are too precious. You know, one of the first encounters I had was at a bus stop in Berlin. I started talking to this lady because the buses weren't coming. She was older, and I said, were you around for the airlift? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, did you go out there to, you know, catch the candy? And she's like, no, we collected something much more precious. I would wait at the street corners or on a street that had a lot of potholes and wait for the coal trucks to come by in the hopes that they would lose a piece of coal. She said it was so precious, and it was like finding a piece of gold, you know? And that was one of the first stories I wrote down from memory, because that just really, you know, touched me. And then Denise shared her contacts, you know, that she has met over the years. And I've reached out to some of them, and yeah, finding people. And it's just incredible what has happened since that story found me. Like, I feel like I'm just following my heart, and I feel like it's something I have to do.
Yeah, and a lot of it is kind of you kind of discovering your own history, in a sense, a
Yes.
history that
Yes.
shaped you in ways that you weren't even aware of. I mean, your mom, who's with us tonight, Linda, she grew up in East Berlin. Did she share many? And unfortunately, her microphone isn't working. But BB, did your mother, Linda Omi, did she share any stories with you about the war? I think she was 4 years old when the war ended, 7 years old when the airlift began.
Yeah, she did at times. And I've asked her now, obviously, since I'm interviewing people, I've, you know, dug a little deeper with her too and sat her down and said, tell me more, you know? And yes, she remembers, you know, hearing the sirens and running to the bomb shelters in the middle of the night, and, you know, all of that, and what it was like after the war. And yeah, some of those stories I hear from her or from other people they're not pretty, you know?
They're
What
the
they,
ugly,
what,
yeah,
yeah,
the ugliest war stories you could, I think you could ever imagine.
yeah.
And I just look at your mom here, Linda, kind of being amazed that I hate to put it this way, but that she's alive, that she was such a small, tiny, vulnerable child in 1945 in this horrendous war, just, you know, swirling around her like a horrible tornado. And somehow she made it through. as did Dagmar. And I want to ask Daggy, uh, are we exaggerating what Berlin was like after World War II? Can you tell us?
No, no. You cannot say enough about how Berlin was. I mean, I grew up during Adolf Hitler's time, and things were horrible. Things were fearful. I do remember the air raids day and night when the bombs fell, and we sitting in the air raid shelter, hoping that we are alive for one more day. The German people didn't give up hope. They were very strong in keeping the hope inside of them, just like I know from my mom and my dad, that better times were coming for us, that all the horrible things that we were going through during that horrible time would go away, and that we would come out alive and come out to be a better nation in this world than what we were under Adolf Hitler's rule. The memories of friends we had that were Jewish people, good friends to my brothers, soldiers in a war that were put in the front lines because they were Jewish, so that they would be shot first. All these things I remember. I remember the prayers going up that were in hiding in our apartment because we were not supposed to pray in public. It would jail us if we were praying in public. And so we did that in hiding for our friends that we loved, but yet we couldn't help. We remained alive because we were not Jewish. But millions of wonderful people, friends of my brothers, were losing their lives because of what they believed in. And I grew up under that pressure. My mom and my dad did their best to keep me shielded from everything that my eyes could see as a small child that was going on around us in Adolf Hitler's time. I walked down the streets on the hand of my mom, and all of a sudden I saw many people standing in front of me, and then a window of a store was broken because somebody threw a rock through it. And I jumped back, afraid of what I was seeing in front of me, and Mom pulled me back. And then when I asked questions as everything was done and we went home, and I asked questions, Mom, why is this happening? She said, Daggy, there are people owning the store that are lovely people, but they're not liked by the head of our country. And she had to explain to me that I had to grow up keeping my mouth shut and my thoughts to myself, that I could not speak them in public. Because if I shared in public what I was feeling as a little girl, I endangered my family, my mom, my dad, my brothers, and friends around me. And I grew up under that threat, and I became a very silent little girl, an afraid little girl, afraid of everyone, because the only ones I trusted was my mom, my dad, and my brothers, and nobody else.
Daggy,
So when it came to the end of the war,
yeah, and the end of the war, that's where most Americans kind of leave Germany, leave the story. The war, Germany surrenders, the war is over. And I think in our heads, we kind of think, well, Germany rebuilt, but that's not how it was.
no, I was 11 when the war ended. And like I said, we were very fortunate to be alive because so many wasn't. So many graves in the middle of the city. Right now, there are buildings built over the graves of the people underneath.
Wow.
Because there were open craters and people were pushed into those craters. The corpses of people were pushed into those craters and covered up. They didn't go to the cemeteries like they should have went. They are underneath Berlin. The Berlin built now, that is standing now, is built over World War II.
Mm.
And the people that were buried underneath.
How did your
My
family
town
survive?
is a memorial of what happened so long ago. You know, I love my hometown with all that's in me, you know, the history of it, the people in it. I love my hometown with all that's in me. But the memory I have of everything, right now where we are talking, is so vivid inside of me. And I count also the blessings that came my way as a little one, a 14-year-old girl after the war. You know, these memories are with me right now, right here as we talk.
What do you
The
remember of
memories
the
of
airlift?
helping hands. The helping hands is the airlift that came for us that lived in West Berlin. And I remember the day the airlift started. We lived in a little apartment in West Berlin, in Friedenau, West Berlin at that time. And I remember the noise that the airplanes made as they flew into West Berlin. And the noise was so strong because airplanes came down so low over our apartment building that the noise was unbelievably loud. And my mom and I fell to the floor of the little apartment we had under the rooftop. That was my grandparents' place that we inherited because they passed away in 45. But my mom and I fell to the floor, and all we could think of was, bombs are going to drop. That's how loud these planes were that flew in. And I fell to the floor, and so did my mom, covering our head, laying on the floor, thinking bombs were going to drop. It is wartime. And we laid there for a while with our eyes closed, with our hands folded behind our heads. And then my mom got off the floor, and she pulled me off the floor. And she said, Daggy, no bombs are dropping. These are the helping hands. These are the God sent that are flying over us, bringing life to us and help to us. And we stood in our little kitchen, my mom and I, hugging each other, crying and hugging each other, because help was coming our way, not just my mom's way, but West Berlin's way, by the love and the kindness that the Western nations were bringing us. And this is what I remember. I can't forget ever this time, or the helping hands, or the flyers that gave their life for us to help West Berliners. I can't forget. It's inside of me forever and ever.
You know, Daggy, we have one of your fellow West Berliners with us, Ava Priestley, who's joining us,
Here,
courtesy of Bob von
I
Bargen.
was here.
Ava, you remember the airlift?
Oh, yes, I do remember. Even though I did not see the planes, I knew they were there. We could hear them. Tempelhof, where the planes landed. Oh, and Bibi wrote all about it. She read my book, and I had also a meeting with her, a Zoom meeting, and she, oh God, I just, she's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yes, you are. Did you get my response?
Yes, and I revised it and will send it back.
Okay, all right.
Ava, did you ever pick up one of the parachutes with the candy in it?
No, 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 no. I never went to Templehof. No,
Did
I
you?
didn't get any of the candy, but I was happy enough that we got some food, and that was great.
Isn't that amazing? Thank you, Ava. Thank you for joining us. And Bob Von Bargen, thank you for encouraging Ava to join us. I want to go to Ralph now. Ralph Dion, Air Force veteran. Ralph, you're almost 99 years old. When did you join the Air Force?
I joined the Air Force in 1946. And of course, I had gone through World War II in my school years in high school, and I knew what was going on overseas and all the horrible things that were happening. But in my graduation of 1946, the year I joined the U.S. Air Force, I always wanted to be an officer. I always wanted to fly. So in joining, they trained me and they sent me to a specialty school for mechanics because I could be near aircraft, and I was happy with that.
So
And,
why did you not become a pilot?
I did not become a pilot. Reason number one, I found out I was 1 inch too short.
Oh,
Well, how do you? I said I eat a lot of bananas if I'm going to get taller.
you needed bigger heels on your shoes.
Yes, they found a little astigmatism left eye, but that was tough and tough to take.
Yeah.
I just felt that. Do you want me to get into the airlift?
Yeah, please
Yeah.
do. Please do.
Well, okay. I was trained and I was sent to Westover Air Force Base in Springfield, Massachusetts. And that was the location of the MATS military air transport aircraft flying to Europe. It was a jumping off point, a logical point. So I worked there for a couple of years as a mechanic on aircraft, C-54s, learning how to keep them going and progressing. I was promoted to sergeant by that time. That was my second year. And in my third year, well, that's involved the Berlin Airlift. Being a mechanic there and working was fine. But in early August of 1940, what would it be? 1948, 47. Anyways, a notice came on the bulletin board in our barracks saying that the following officers and enlisted men will prepare to leave in 3 days to flying to Berlin. And we had to get things ready, remove all our property from the airbase. So it didn't feel too comfortable because there was something going on in Europe, in Berlin, that was developing. And we did not know exactly what it would be. But we were supposed to go for a 90-day term of duty, and eventually it gets extended another 90 days. So in my first, oh boy, there's too much to tell. My first 90 days, I was a mechanic, and I was stationed in Frankfurt in a large complex, like an apartment complex, no less. And it was actually the barracks for Hitler's SS troops prior to us getting in there. So you kind of wonder if there's any ghosts floating around. But the rooms were adequate, good facilities. It had cafeteria served by German personnel. The German people, first, we didn't know how to take it because of the war situation. But we found that at the main gate of this encampment, the women would come up and they would pick up your clothing, your uniform, anything, and they would take it home and wash this and bring it back in good condition. When these women did that and brought your clothing back to you, which was a risk, there was a lot of trust there. And they were paid in cigarettes. And you became a pretty good idea of what's been going on and how the people were suffering there. And in the city of Frankfurt, the streets were more or less deserted. You see a few people on bikes, some old men, everybody wore dark clothes with their satchels, and they'd hobble along, walk along, and stop and pick up a cigarette butt, put it in their sack, and go on. And I said, my God, young man, you never realized in your life back in the United States what things could be like here. And it was pitiful. But we did work outside on the aircraft at, Tempelhof, no, Rhine-Main.
Rhine-Main, right.
Rhine-Main. And we worked outside at first in the dark, flashlights, taking the cowling off, working inside the engine, the cells. Eventually, they did build up these nice shacks or sheds that allowed the aircraft to be pulled inside the engines, and you could work at engine height. That was great. But the duty was 12 hours on, 12 hours off, round the clock. And it is kind of tiresome, but we were accomplishing what we were supposed to do.
Ralph, you worked on C-54s, correct?
Yes.
I've heard, and I've just read, this is just what I've read about, that these planes were so abused. I mean, these planes are flying around the clock and they're flying coal, and coal dust is terrible for airplanes, and that they're just a mess, and that things wore out really quickly, that the maintenance was like a whole war within a war, just maintaining these things, right?
As I say, it was a lot of work, and everybody did their bit. They even had some German mechanics hired, to aircraft mechanics, to help. Actually.
And what were the crews like? What were the pilots like? Were they exhausted? Or I've heard that they could be pretty irritable.
Yeah, they were tired for sure, but it's not like another outfit. I almost never had the same pilot and co-pilot on all the flights that I had, the 74 flights, because it just is a rotation system, and those had to get out for a while, and it changed all the time. So you always had a different pilot, co-pilot. So we didn't learn the names of the pilots or co-pilots. It was either sir, and sir, or sergeant. And that was military law, and it was great. Eventually, I'll put a little bit in here. They started rewarding the crews, the working crews, and the pilots. So they came up with a system where they would choose certain people to go 3 days to Paris for recuperation. And they came up with a list of officers and tech sergeants and master sergeants. And here's Ralph Leon on the list. They said, holy cows. So I had a 3-day vacation in Paris. Visited. It was great. And I met a Frenchman there on the tower, and we talked. And eventually he took me to his home and met his wife. They put on a meal for me, and they didn't have anything, you know. It was so nice. And he took me back to the airport, Orly, and that was a good gesture. But they tried to do the best they could to keep us happy and going. I did make 74 trips to Berlin. I made trips to Burton Wood in England for 200-hour inspections. They also did 1,000-hour inspections in England, and it tore down engines, and I'll get into that. And I had a flight back to the United States with 1,000-hour an aircraft that had 1,000 hours on it, and it had to be refurbished, gone through. And I flew back as flight engineer on another C-54, which was fine condition. So it was interesting. It was a highlight of my life because I always wanted to fly. And it just told me, go to that airplane and fly. Wow. And it was tough to leave. You know, when my 300 hours are out, they wanted to rotate me. Off I went. holy cows, I hate to leave.
Isn't that something? So you were there at age 20, a very young man,
Yeah.
kind of still new to the world. And did you have a sense of what the airlift was achieving? Did you have a sense of how it was working? Did you have a larger sense of what you were contributing to?
We felt that we must be succeeding because we just kept going and going and going. And there wasn't a lot of communication, outside communication. We didn't know what was going on politically. No idea. Just kept working, and it all worked out.
You were there, yeah, you were just doing your job. And I will say politically, Harry Truman, put his presidency on the line for this. And I think I think there's no doubt that without the airlift, he would not have been reelected in 1948, or elected in 1948. He ran for election. He inherited the White House from after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, and ran on his own terms in 1948, was very much an underdog in that race. But the airlift was succeeding by November 1948, and he beat Thomas Dewey. Um, Thank you, Ralph. And I want to go back to you, but I also want to go now to Denise Williams. Denise, again, it was a highlight of my life,
Oh,
meeting
yes.
meeting your father on Zoom, several years ago. He passed away 4 years ago. How do you keep Gail Halverston's memory and legacy alive, Denise?
Well, I think the favorite way is to visit school classes. And because before he died, I went with him on many visits to schools and community organizations and churches, and also to Germany, and watched him present, and just the light in the eyes of the people and the kids that touch. So I love reading Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot. And Bibi has also made some wonderful slides that I've shown at some school classes. And that has been great. I love to tell the story that touches the hearts of people. I can see it in their faces when they really sense the meaning and the values of what can be learned from my father's act of dropping parachutes and coming up with the idea when he met the kids at the fence.
Yeah,
I'm also part of the Candy Bomber Foundation, and we're working to connect with schools and with other groups to teach STEM lessons, because my father was also a rocket scientist as well as a pilot throughout his Air Force career of 31 years. So we're connecting to kids with STEM and also with the arts. There's a Candy Bomber musical that can be produced in elementary schools that has already been done 4 times. And through these means, the arts and also science, the kids can learn the values that my father stood for, and others like Ralph Dion and others like Daggy and Bibi. These are really good friends. And I just love the connections that I've made because of my father and mother through the years with people that survived and lived through that time. I think you probably know he was the commander at Tempelhof Airport from Air Base from 1970 to 74, right at the height of the Cold War. And so I had graduated from high school in 1970 and got to study German there and music. And people just found me when I went places with them. The people would come out of the woodwork because I had learned German. They were speaking to me about their experiences and their family experiences during the war. So it's a part of my heart and soul. I feel a responsibility to share these things with other people.
This is what your dad said that will always stay with me. My experience on the airlift taught me that gratitude, hope, and service before self can bring happiness to the soul when the opposite brings despair. I think that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, because as people were thanking him and praising him for his work on the airlift, he said something like, I was doing it for me. I was doing it because I was getting something from it. And I think that was just a great lesson for all of us, that you kind of ennoble and elevate yourself when you work on behalf of something larger than yourself. And he was such a great man, and he just radiated such love and wisdom and boy, here's a great picture of him when he was younger. And here's another one. People should know he was, of course, served in World War II also. I think he was a C-47 pilot, correct?
Yes, well, at the beginning, he had flown C-47 transports in South America during the war. He fortunately was never, although he was trained as a fighter pilot. By the time he earned his wings in 1944, he was assigned to be a cargo pilot. So he never dropped bombs in Germany, which he was always very grateful for, but he flew transport operations in South America during the war. So,
And he was recalled. He stayed in the Air Corps and was recalled in 1948 for the airlift. And
no,
I've heard, wouldn't he?
He was still active that time. He wasn't recalled. He was flying another aircraft. Maybe Ralph could help me remember. Was it a B-70 or a C-72, Ralph? I don't know, but he was
that was cargo.
Yeah, he was. That's right. It would be a C. So he was at Air Base, and the airplane was being repaired. This was was it Alabama, Ralph? And
I don't know.
He heard about the Berlin Airlift, and he thought he'd go to a meeting about it. And they were calling all the C-54 crews, and he'd flown C-54s in South America. They called them in and said, we're going to assign you for this new thing going on. It's a Berlin Airlift. He heard about it, and he heard his buddy's name mentioned during this briefing. And his buddy had just had, his wife had just had twins. And so he said to the commanding officer, his buddy wasn't even there, he was still flying. He said, how about I take the place of my friend, Pete Silva, and then he can stay home with his newborn twins. And Pete agreed to it, and so that he volunteered basically. And then I believe it was just a matter of a couple of days that or even the next day he was sent, and that was around July the 12th of 1948. He was sent there.
Yeah, I mean, right at the beginning of the airlift. He was there right at the beginning. Wonderful picture of Daggy and your father here. Oh boy. Daggy, you loved Gail enormously. When he died, you sent me an email and a message just saying, I lost a friend, but the world has lost a hero.
Yeah. Colonel Halverson, well, at the time that I was a 14-year-old, he wasn't a colonel yet. But he is and always will be my hero. And not just mine, that of all of the kids of Berlin that can remember him. To look into his eyes, like here in this picture, I was looking straight into his blue eyes. And I told him, when I held him, I said, you are the one I've been waiting for to meet. All of my life, I loved you. And I love you right now with all that's in me. That's what I was, that's what I was saying to him as I was hanging on to him. And the truth is, he was the second American, actually the second one that I loved. There was another one before him that I not get to meet the way I did him. And that was when I was in a church building as an 11-year-old child for the first Christmas. I was given a chocolate bar by an American soldier that night, that holy night, in a church building in West Berlin at that time. And I loved this young soldier also because he took the fear away that was still in me after the war as an 11-year-old child. That soldier in that church building, a blonde-headed American, handed me as a gift, Christmas gift, a small chocolate bar. And when I came home to my mom that night, I shared that with her. And I loved that young man that I never got to meet again or talk to about again. But then came Colonel Halverson. And on a street in West Berlin that I was walking on, I walked by a burned out building that an airplane had crashed into, and they lost their lives there. I stopped at that spot and looked at that airplane sticking out of that building and said my prayer for the ones that I knew had died there, for us West Berliners. I walked a little bit further down that street on a sunny day and looked down at the sidewalk.
You see
And
the
there on the sidewalk lay the dirty parachute with a little bit of something good still at the end of it, melting away in the sun. And this 14-year-old girl bent down and picked up the melting chocolate and put it in her mouth. I looked up to the sky and thinking I knew who dropped that. Now, the parachute could have come out of that airplane that crashed, but in my mind, it came from Uncle Wiggly Wings. Uncle Wiggly Wings.
And here's the book that you wrote, a tribute. This is Dagmar.
For me. And I picked it up and I ate that, and I thought in my 14-year-old head, I thought, Mom, my mom at home, you better not look at me now, because she always told me, don't pick anything off the street. It's dirty, it's nasty. You don't pick it up. But I disobeyed. I picked up the melting chocolate. I put it in my mouth. I looked up and said, Uncle Wiggly Wings, you meant for me to have it. And then I went on my walk for whatever I was supposed to do for my mom. I don't remember what it was. Turned around, came back home, and told my mom what I did. And she was not upset with me that I picked something off the dirty sidewalk, because it came from my Uncle Wiggly Wings, and it was meant for me. And then I met him, many years later. I was blessed to meet him. And I hugged him, as you see in this picture that you've shown. I hugged him, I looked into his blue eyes, fell in love all over again. All over again.
And I have to say,
With
this is
my
a
Uncle
beautiful,
Wiggly.
this book is a beautiful tribute to him. Uncle Wiggly Wings, My Love and Admiration for the Candy Bomber by Dagmar Weiss
Yeah,
Snodgrass.
my Uncle
And,
Wiggly
and,
Wings.
and that's a reference to what Gail said to the kids when the kids said, well, how do we know that you're going to be, you're the plane that's going to be dropping the candy? And he said, I'll wiggle my wings when I'm over your houses. And so
Uncle Wiggly Wings.
he became Uncle Wiggly Wings, yeah. And if people want to read more about Daggie's story, quite a story
There
it
you
is.
have me.
She has, here she is. She has a two-part memoir. Daggie's story, part one, is Germany, pretty harrowing, and Daggie's story is how she came to America. So I do encourage you go on Amazon and get it. It's really a wonderful.
I think it's been Todd, I think the family has discontinued that. You would really have to talk to Amazon and say, I want this book, and they might put it out again. But my family had discontinued it a while back.
Oh,
I've been
no.
so involved with everything that they thought, as old as I'm getting, they needed to stop everything that was going on. But if you go to Amazon and you say, I want this book, or I want the books, they will try to sell it.
So we'll do a little search and see if they're available somewhere. I want to open this up to you guys, to everybody here. If you have a question or comment for any of our guests, for BB or Ralph or Linda Omi Roth, or for Daggy, for Denise Williams, please do raise your hand or wave your hand in front of the, or put a question here in the chat. Al Smith asked a very good question. And Greg Yost ventured an answer, and I want to open it up to maybe Scott Masters too has an answer for this. Al, I believe your question was, what if Stalin had shot down a C-54 or a C-47 flying into Tempelhof? Would that have triggered World War III?
Yeah, my quick thought is, would America have a taste for going back to war at that point?
No. It's so hard to imagine that happening. It's so you know, the U.S. This is before the Cold War buildup, and the post-war, the post-World War II, I think demobilization was really swift and pretty darn complete by 1948. The one thing that the U.S. did have, I think, as Greg Yost said, and I will invite him to make a comment on this if it like, um, the one thing that the U.S. had was the bomb that the Soviets didn't have. And my understanding is, my memory is that Truman did order some B-29s flown to England
60.
as a show of that perhaps there might be bombs there, atomic bombs there. I don't think they were nuclear armed, but the B-29s were there in England to give Stalin pause. Ralph, do you have any sense of what might have happened if the Soviets had shot down a plane
I think they'd be seeing some B-29s over Russia.
over Moscow?
Yeah. But the B-20, there was 60 B-29s there, but there were 8 atom bomb capable, but none of them had atom bombs on them. But the Russians did not know that.
But the Russians
Very
didn't know
effective.
that.
Yeah. And
Okay.
even a bombing campaign would take quite a while. Where do you get the bombs? What do you load? All that. It would take time. So it's pretty hard to say how it would all end up.
I think the only way that the U.S. could have gone to war with the Soviets would have been through a nuclear strike, because we didn't have the manpower on the ground to fight any kind of conventional ground war. Greg Yost, do you want to chime in on this?
Very much agree with that. I actually, in the chat, I put a chess comment there about a threat being stronger than its execution, and I think the B-29s in England were a threat, even if they weren't nuclear armed. An interesting thing would have been, had the Soviets tried to shoot down these planes, would that have fired up the Europeans enough? And they still didn't have solid control over Eastern Europe. So could this have sort of created more problems for them than it was worth, even if the U.S. didn't militarily retaliate? That's a hypothetical. They really didn't have the puppet government set up yet
Right.
in early 48. I mean, that took a while. It took a lot longer than we might think. So, and then the anti-communist sentiment, the anti-Soviet sentiment in the U.S. was rising. I mean, this was the His trials, which were before McCarthyism, right? McCarthy was sort of a late comer to the whole Red Scare thing. So there was enough, all these people came back. We fought this war to win, and then all of a sudden, all of Eastern Europe and now China is going bad. So there might have been enough sentiment to fight.
Yeah.
Might have been.
Yeah, there might have been, and this was the Cold War in 1948 was still not quite a foregone conclusion. It was pretty darn close, but it was not quite. I think if you were to ask Americans in 1948, is the United States going to go to war, or there'll be a lasting conflict with the Soviet Union? Most Americans would say yes, but they'd have no idea that it would go on and on for decades and would involve Vietnam and Korea, and so it still wasn't. The conflict wasn't quite acute where it would become yet. But boy, after the Berlin Airlift, things went downhill really fast, really fast. Yeah, Barb Smith. Let's unmute you here.
Thank you all for participating. Talk about a culminating activity. Dagmar, Eva, Ralph, everyone, thank you for participating in this. I sent 5 slides to Todd and Sean. I don't know if they received them, if they could show them, but my husband and I, Barb and Bob Smith, we live between Cleveland and Sandusky, Ohio. And coincidentally, we just participated this past weekend in something called the Taste of History, where almost 9,000 visitors came on 2 days to witness activities from the Revolutionary War to present campaigns. And our Taste of History, thanks to Glenn and Sherry Priest, who are retired Army veterans from New York, they took us to the Imperial Duxford Museum, where we had the great privilege of entering the C-54 where your father, his story, Eva, was presented to us. And I said, we've got to learn this story and do this program at the Taste of History. So yes, here we are this past weekend. What the kids and the adults did, they came to our table first, told the story of Lieutenant Halverson. I held the 2 sticks of double mint gum, tried to show them what like 15 pieces would look like on each slice. Asked the children that would come up to the table, would you split 15 one piece of gum 15 ways? And they're like, no, probably not. One little girl, sure. And so once they came to me and learned the story about Halverson, I had my book, my copy marked to the page what it says Was ist Wiggle. When the little girl, I said everybody should get this book, because when the little girl asked, well, how will we know which airplane is yours when you said you're going to drop candy on us tomorrow? It is because I will wiggle my wings. And she asked, Was ist Wiggle? And then of course he shows how he would do that in an airplane. And here we have, after they left my table, they went to my husband Bob, who you see there in the center. I tried not to show any images of the children. And what we did was, before they left my table, they had a selection of maybe 10 different colors of paratroopers parachutes. And they went to Bob, the trainer, and he would show them how to throw the paratroopers and to land in the LZ, the landing zone there. And it was so fun to watch the children first select the colors that they wanted, and then to watch the parents observe the children throwing the parachutes. Once they left that area, and of course, many parents took a photo of my book that I had on display. Then they were to come back to my table and sign my friendship towel, which they did. You can see the first couple of them. There's Obi, and then you can see it getting larger and larger. And then finally at the end, you can see how many friends I had after 2 days. And at one point, many points, I kept saying, oh my gosh, you must have to have unusual names to sign my towel. I think Jim was the only one that was a regular name. At one point, 2 boys stood next to the towel side by side, waiting to sign their names. My name's Carson. I asked their names. My name's Carson. The boy next to him says, my name's Carson. I mean, it was amazing. So anyway, after they signed my towel, I showed them a poster of the types of candies that would have been available maybe in the 1940s, hoping that I got it right, this what might have been in the handkerchiefs, and then the parachutes that were dropped for the children. And then here is how I selected them and then put stickers in there as well, and then tied them off so that they each got a sample of what maybe the children received as well. And it was absolutely joyous. And I know Bob wants to say a little bit about what his experience was, if you don't mind.
To see the children do this and understand what your story was, and then to accept the candy that you may have received was absolutely outstanding. I've just
to watch Bob instruct the children on how to throw the parachutes. You don't want to land in the woods. You don't want to land in the water. And to watch the children's expressions and the parents, it was absolutely joyous, just joyful. So thank you. And then for us to be here tonight with you is absolutely a miracle. Thank you all so much for your stories. We are so grateful. We will continue your legacy. You can be sure. And I hope one day we'll all meet in person and look into your eyes just like you did with Colonel Halverson. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barb and Bob. But two remarkable people. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I want to show also, thank you, Bob von Bargen, for letting us know about Ava's book. Ava Priestley has a memoir, A Girl Named Ava. Look at that picture. Ava, was that really you? Look at that picture. Oh my.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to imagine a little girl like that living in a hellscape like what's pictured behind her. But That's what life gave them. Thank you, Bob. Do we have any more comments or questions for our guest, Craig?
Yes, I wanted to mention that when speaking of the devastation in Berlin during the war, when Potsdam happened in the summer of '45, not only did Truman and Churchill and Attlee, of course, go to Potsdam, but they brought the whole military crew. There's evidence, there are records that they were genuinely surprised at how devastated Berlin had been. They had seen all the reports, they had seen the intelligence, the aerial reconnaissance. When they saw it with their own eyes, they were shocked at how badly Berlin had been destroyed. So talk about the state that Berlin was in 45 and 46, 47, 48. Yeah, the US, the top people in the US and Britain saw it with their own eyes and were genuinely surprised at how bad it had really been.
Yeah, it was breathtaking how devastated Berlin was. And Greg, when the big three met in July 1945, they were looking for a building in Berlin. And there was no standing building in Berlin that could accommodate. They had to go to the suburbs all the way to Potsdam, which is why the Potsdam meeting was held there, because it was the only intact building that was big enough to accommodate everybody. Just amazing. Ralph, Bob von Bargen, who spent a career as a Air Force navigator, said that he's on the call here. He's
Great.
And he there he is. Hey, Bob. Bob, you have said this many times, and you said it here again in the chat, that those who maintain the airplanes do not get the recognition and the credit that they deserve.
That is so true. But, the maintenance men in World War II, I interviewed some maintenance guys. The public takes for granted that airplane is going to sit there on the ramp and it's going to be ready for the air crew to go out there and just climb in and crank up the engines and go. Those airplanes came back and they were riddled with holes. They fixed them up. Ralph is an engine mechanic. Those airplanes that come in, you'd have to in the middle of the night, and they'd be you'd be out there in the cold and trying to change an engine in the middle of the night and busting your knuckles and trying to get this thing going. They never get the recognition. There was one case, and I was writing to Ben about it earlier. At McGuire, in front of the base terminal, there's a C-54. As a matter of fact, at McGuire, the beautiful large mess hall is Halverson Hall. It's named after him. But that airplane that sits, it's the only one that I'm aware of that where the maintenance people are recognized. But, I saw a joke once where it said a tribute to the maintenance man, and it showed a blue maintenance truck up on a pedestal instead of an airplane.
I love it.
I love that.
I'll send it to you.
I love it. Please do send that to me. I would love to share that. Bob, in every movie I've ever seen, the airplane is in perfectly good condition and the pilot just jumps in and then has a great adventure that you watch on the screen. You never do see the hard work that Ralph and others are doing to get that plane, in that position. Hey, Bob Flage, how are you? Bob, could you unmute, please?
There we go. I just had a question about the corridors. If any of those aircraft went down in those corridors and there were survivors, how were they treated by the Russians?
Great question. I don't have an answer to that. Does anybody know? I'll share a picture again of those air corridors and you could see that they were quite narrow. I think 20 miles wide.
10,000 feet. Go ahead.
Ralph, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that 20 miles wide and 10,000 feet high, the three corridors into Berlin. I don't think anybody went down into Russian territories or crashed in Russian territory. I think we would have heard about it. There would have been a story.
Part of the American Heart Association.
I agree. I don't think any did. I don't recall there being a story about any airplane crashing in Soviet occupied
Right.
East Germany.
Can I add something here?
Yes, please.
So my father never mentioned that, and I agree. I don't think that ever happened. But he did say that sometimes he would be buzzed on his flights, that some of the yaks would come up underneath them, or fly right next to them, and or fly towards them and get really close, and then fly away. So that's what he experienced, but he never said that there was a plane that went down in the corridors.
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard of that either, but I do wonder what would have happened. I imagine they would have been held as prisoners if they survived.
Probably.
Barb.
Thank you again. I wanted to again thank Dagmar and Eva for sharing your perspective. We have always heard the stories of the Jews and the Jewish children and the Jewish adults, and never before tonight did I really make the connection that Germans always knew what was happening to the Jews, and they just didn't do anything about it. But to hear the stories of the German children and your experiences of war is just so precious. And then the appreciation and gratitude that you had for during the airlift is just so poignant and so appreciated. Thank you so much. I'll make sure I share that always. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb. I have let's see here. I have something else I want to share, a cartoon that Ralph maybe especially will enjoy, and he may remember it. Oh, and there's another thing I want to share that Ralph shared with me. Okay, so I'm going to play from this slide. Oh, there we go. All right. So I'm going to share a cartoon of, I think that illustrates just how harrowing the airlift was for the crews. Right here, this is a cartoon that I ran across. The airlift hitch. This is a replacement going in. He looks all shiny and fresh. After a month, he's kind of stressed. Second month, he's even more stressed. Third month, it looks like he's going to have a breakdown. Fourth month, he's shaking. Fifth month, he's angry. 6 months, he looks like he's, finally at the end. And then he gets rotated out and he's fresh again. And this was very much, by the end of your 6-month hitch as a crewman, you were at your wit's end. That was that. And then the other thing I was going to share is that you shared with me, Ralph. Let's see here. Hold on. Bear with me. 1 second. I can't believe I forgot to share this. Okay. Here we go. Here it is. This is it. Can you tell us what the song Operation Vittles was, Ralph? Let's see here. I'm going to ask you, Ralph, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you can.
You have to repeat yourself. You're muted. Go ahead. Start over.
Start over?
Yep.
Okay, Bob Hope was sponsoring shows in 1948 for Christmas to the various Air Force bases, and Irving Berlin wrote this song for the airlift. And it was quite a ditty. And, I think that Irving was there to sing it. I'm not sure. But it was nice of Bob to make the tour, and we enjoyed that Christmas. I don't know if anybody else has seen this song or not, but I have a copy of it here.
Can you sing a few bars, Ralph?
No. Off we go.
The lyrics are like, not long ago, a group
Not
called the Air Corps
long
helped
ago.
win the war and took a bow. Not long ago, we cheered the fighting Air Corps. Let's see what's happened to them now. And it tells the story. Operation Vittles was kind of the nickname of supplying West Berlin with food.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful artifact that you have here. Ben Wright, fellow Air Force veteran.
Oh yes, the Berlin corridors continued in existence, I think, till 1989. I flew them in the 70s and flew in and out of Tempelhof several times, which is now closed. It's I think it's some sort of memorial or museum now. But it was the other factor is German weather and, the fog and the weather, and it was a lot of instrument flying. And the runway at Tempelhof is only about 6,000, a little over 6,000 feet long. So fully loaded C-54 would have been well challenged going in and out of there. And the ramp, the parking ramp is not huge. I mean, it's pretty good size, but they would have been stretched with all the aircraft coming in and out of there. And we used to joke about, in pilot training, you learned how to do takeoff and landing data with a mythical 50-foot obstacle. Well, at Tempelhof, it's not mythical, right off the end of the runway. In fact, you would make the approach in there and you'd be flying in between apartment buildings. You could see people in their apartments out off the wing. I mean, it's a very densely populated, compact area they're flying into. So the descriptions that we had from the ladies about hearing the aircraft, I mean, the airport was right in the middle of the populated area.
So you could see as a pilot, Ben, how harrowing this flight would have been. The short hop would have
and
been.
weather conditions and plus, at the time, the air traffic control wasn't talking to each other. You had all these procedures with the corridors and in fact, you had to fly with a flight examiner to be certified to fly Berlin corridor missions, even in the 70s, because they didn't want you to cause an international incident. But the Soviet aircraft and East German aircraft flying in East Berlin, they weren't talking to you. They would pick them up on radar and they'd, point them out to you, and you just look for them and make sure you stayed away from them, make sure you didn't get into East Berlin. When you flew in and out of Tempelhof.
So you weren't allowed to wander off that.
Oh no, you didn't go wandering off. In fact, you had to fly on the center line, and once you entered the corridor to go to Berlin, you were going to Berlin. And it was the same way coming out. You couldn't turn around. So if you had a problem, you kept going, and you knew what the weather was. So because you didn't want a thunderstorm sitting there in the middle. And if you want to do a center line check on the corridor, all you had to do was look down and look at the Soviet SAM sites you were flying over.
Wow, how interesting. Boy, yeah. BB, I want to ask you, I know that you've interviewed many veterans of the airlift, and you just discovered a new veteran who is a meteorologist for the Air Force?
Yes, he was a weatherman. He lives in Colorado Springs. And I actually haven't interviewed many veterans because there are just not that many left. But, I'm doing a lot of research into finding their stories and their reports on the airlift and stuff. And what's really fun sometimes is when I find somebody who talked about Christmas, for example, at one of the airports and how the British people organized a Christmas party for all the kids. And then when I find a story from a person who was a child that talks about that, and how they remember it, it's so precious.
How wonderful.
So, yes. And I actually found a veteran here in Orlando. He's 102, I think, or maybe 103 by now, who I interviewed last year, and just happened to come across. I walked into a museum and they said, oh yeah, we have a World War II veteran that comes here, and he was in the airlift too. And they arranged for me to meet with him, and I interviewed him.
And so
but there are not a lot left. Not many left, So
if any of us know of veterans or anybody who grew up in Berlin and was in the airlift, you would love to be able to make contact with them and interview them.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you explain, BB, what you're doing in this picture here?
That's the one picture I have from the time that the Berlin Wall came down. That's me taking down the wall personally.
How about that?
Yeah.
Can this is such a dumb question, but what was it like for the wall to come down?
It was incredible. I didn't think I would ever see that happening in my lifetime, you know? I mean, I was born in 63. It was always there. I didn't know a world that was any different. And I very much felt the wall, the presence of the wall, because we couldn't just drive out of the city to the countryside, you know, because we had to, when we wanted to, we had Berlin, and that has a lot of green areas and parks. But when we wanted to leave Berlin, we had to go through a checkpoint, drive through East Germany, come out on the other end, go through another checkpoint. And, you know, it was pretty scary. And to go to West Germany. And then we could have, you know, visit other cities and see the countryside and all of that. And so I very much felt the presence of the wall, and I didn't think I'd ever see it coming down. And my goal in life as a young person was to leave Berlin, because I didn't like growing up like that. But when I started doing the research about the airlift, I realized that growing up with the wall was the lesser of two evils, because had they not been successful with the airlift, I would have grown up under the Soviets. And my life would have looked very different. And, you know, everybody's in Berlin, and who knows, maybe West Germany, all of West Germany and Western Europe. We don't know what might have happened, you know. And so I'm very grateful for what they accomplished. Ralph, thank you again.
Yeah,
you know,
welcome.
I'm gonna, Gil Ferry, you're familiar with East Berlin and East Germany. You were imprisoned in East Berlin in 1961.
Yeah, before Bibi was born.
Before Bibi was born.
Yeah, that makes her a very young lady. My wife is Swedish, and her grandmother was born in Berlin, in Zehlendorf, and 3 of her sister's daughters and a husband live there, all of whom I met. And they stated to a person that when the Russian army came in, and I believe some of them were Siberian troops, they'd never seen a toilet before. And they knew that the Berliners had taken their silverware and opened up the wall and hidden it in the walls. And they would come into an apartment and start tearing the walls apart to find the silver. And then they would remove the toilet and take it with them back to Siberia or whatever, and use it as a flower pot. Ava, did you ever see any of that occurring?
Let's see if we have Ava here. Maybe Daggy remembers something like that.
Yeah.
I've heard stories like that from people, that they would use the closets for bathrooms and didn't know, you know, what to do with toilets.
Ralph has to comment on that.
Todd, the Russians delayed the advance of the American troops into Berlin for 3 months, and they were stripping the city bare, the toilets, everything was going out. They put all this stuff on trains and shipped it out to Poland, going for Russia. In the end, it did not reach the destination. It just rotted away before it was delivered. That was incredible, the things they did. And it is true.
Yeah.
Daggy.
Yeah. Yeah, what I would like to say about the war ending and the Russian coming in first, if I might say that loud and clear, and I hope I'm allowed to do that.
Yes.
I know war is hell. War is hell. But it continued to be hell for all of us when the Russian forces entered first.
Right.
And it took quite a while till the others came in. And when they came in, I'm saying it with all of my heart, loud and clear, they brought heaven back to us, safety back to us.
Yeah.
When the Russians came in and the soldiers walked the streets of Berlin, the Russian soldiers, they smiled at us. When it came nighttime and it became dark around us, we all went into hiding.
Yeah.
We
Right.
disappeared because their smiles were gone.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
Oh, Daggy, you are
I'm
such
speaking the truth.
no doubt.
If you can imagine that kind of a city, that kind of a life, out in the daytime, smiling at us children and our families, came nighttime, everyone hid away because it was awful.
Daggy,
Sorry to say, it was awful.
you're a very eloquent,
Yeah.
you bear eloquent witness to that period of history. Thank you, Dagmar. Gil, and then I want to
You're
end with Greg Yost.
Yeah.
Gil.
I went back to work in Hamburg the year after. This had been 62 in the summer. And I had a Wirtin, which in German in English is a landlady in a Reihenhaus. And she was a big woman. I mean, she was probably about 5'11" and weighed 250 pounds. She could have been an opera singer with the way she was designed. And a Russian tried to rape her as a young lady, and she killed him. And was very proud of that fact. One of the cousins of my father, my father-in-law, was raped, and she tried to give birth in a ditch, and the baby was stillborn. That's what happened.
Those are grim stories.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gil.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gil. Greg Yost, you have the last word here.
Yes, Denise, I want to make a comment to you. First of all, thank you so much for continuing the tradition. I met your father. I don't know how much you know, but he kept in contact with a Duquesne University history professor named Steve Vardy, who was part of the Institute for German-American Relations. And he would come to Pittsburgh occasionally. Your father would come to Pittsburgh. I had a chance to meet him one time. It was a true privilege, true pleasure. I will say this, of all the people in the United States who have ever been awarded the Medal of Freedom, I cannot imagine why your father has not been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Perhaps that will be corrected. Should have been done in his lifetime. I will ask you to end maybe with this comment. And there are people in Germany who are younger than Bibi, who was born in 63. Some of whom were pretty strong athletes who made the German Olympic team. Would you please finish with the story of your father at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City and the honor that the German Olympic team paid to him in 2002, decades after he did what he did? They were born. None of them could possibly have remembered the Berlin Airlift. But please finish with that tribute that the German Olympic team paid to your father.
No, thank you, Greg. Yes, he was very excited about that. They invited him to lead the German Olympic team out into the stadium for the opening ceremonies and to be the flag bearer. And that's what he did. He wore a big white cowboy hat, and he was just as happy as a child in a candy shop.
Wow, what a fun, what a fun.
Chocolate.
It was a great honor for him. And of course, all the Germans on the teams just loved him and loved hearing about his story and being a part of history with him. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Greg. Thank you especially to Bibi for bringing this all together. Thank you, Daggy, for joining us again tonight. Ralph Dion, thank you. And I hope you'll join us again anytime you'd like. Would love to have you join us any of our open conversations or any of our programs. Wonderful to hear your stories. I'm grateful to Ava Priestley also for joining us, for Bob Von Bargen for bringing her together, for Greg and Gil and Ben and all those who, and Al Smith, all those who contributed to the conversation. I hope to see you Thursday night. We'll be talking about the tanker war in the Gulf. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Right. Thank you.